Hi everybody, Jeremy Siskind here. I'm the author of this book called Playing Solo Jazz Piano. Oh good, I messed up immediately in this video. I'm gonna keep rolling. Today's subject is articulation when playing in a swing style. And what I find is that, especially if you're somebody who's used to playing classical or pop music and you want to play jazz, particularly authentic jazz in a swing style, oftentimes people don't really think enough about articulation. And articulation is absolutely key to getting an authentic swing style correctly. So what I'm going to show you today is 3 essential articulations for a swing style. Now, if you haven't studied a ton of swing music, this is probably all you really know about swing, which is that you take straight eighths and you put them into what we call swing or swung eighths. So we're going to play a scale with eighth notes at a 1-to-1 ratio. When we play swing eighth notes, we're going to lengthen out the eighth notes on the beat and instead have them be in a 2-to-1 ratio. Okay. Now, I love this quote from Ethan Iverson that says, "A musician's eighth notes are between him and his God." So that's a good place to get started with this 2-to-1 ratio. But as you listen and experience more styles, more tempos, more individual takes on eighth notes, you'll find that not everybody plays the eighth notes the same way. And as you get actually to the extremes of tempos, as you play in a ballad style or at a really up-tempo style, eighth notes tend to be much more even. And so it's actually not these swung eighths that make swing rhythm. It's much more the accents and articulation. So what are those? So for eighth notes, a few things. The biggest one that I hear classical musicians doing wrong is that we need to put the emphasis on the offbeats. So here's what we call ricky-ticky eighth notes, where we have the emphasis on the downbeats. This doesn't sound syncopated or jazzy at all. In fact, now we're making the downbeats both longer and weightier, heavier. And so it just feels really downbeat centric, which is the opposite actually of what we want for jazz. So what we want to do here is we want to move the eighth note, the accent, to the offbeat, the shorter of the 2 eighth notes, and instead play. So that now the shorter, more syncopated eighth note gets more weight. Secondly, for the vast majority of the time, unless we're going for a special effect, eighth notes in a swing rhythm are going to be legato. And I hear classical musicians sometimes do this thing, especially when I tell them about that emphasis, that they'll group the eighth notes in 2s. And they'll make really dainty 2-note slurs. And we don't want to do that at all. When we have a string of eighth notes, we want to keep them all legato. And by the way, this includes when we have 2 eighth notes of the same note in a row. We don't want to hear any space between those repeated eighth notes. And that actually comes up a lot. It comes up if you play a tune like C Jam Blues, which we'll get to later, or if you're comping and you're repeating chords. We don't want to hear any space between those eighth notes. So if we have this scale, we're going to play it with these syllables. We'll speak it with these syllables as we're practicing. Do means that it's long, and va means it's short but accented. Do, va, do, va, do, va, do, va. And I'm going to give you these mnemonic devices for each of these different rhythms, because I think they're really helpful in straightening out, no pun intended, where you want to place accents, where you want to place emphasis, where you want to connect. So do, va, do, va, do, va, do, va. And the va is so great because it's not a sharp accent, right? This V is showing you that it's just a little bit of extra weight. And if I had to write that out, I might write it like this, with a little tenuto, just indicating that there should be a little extra weight on those offbeats. If you're new to swing and you're forgetting to swing, a good way to think about it is that you want to keep a triplet subdivision in your head. And everything, now instead of moving from an eighth note grid, is going to move to a triplet grid. So no matter what you're doing, it should be in this 1, 2, 3, 4. want to keep that triplet grid in the back of your head. And everything in the swing rhythm should be with either the first or the third triplet on each beat. Okay, so you can see that the emphasis is moved to the offbeats and the articulation is legato. Second rhythm that I want to talk with you about is a percussive accent. And this is for eighth notes that are on an offbeat and end of phrase, or in other words, they're followed by a rest. So here's a little phrase with 3 different strings of eighth notes. And these ones that are circled meet our criteria for the percussive accents. They're eighth notes on an offbeat, followed by a rest. And what are we going to do with these? Well, we're going to speak them as do-dit, do-dit, do-va-do-dit. And the dit is going to be kind of a percussive accent, louder than your vas, and very short. And let me tell you exactly why we're adding this percussive accent. Usually, let's say that we were playing this piece in a non-jazz style, it would probably be this. We would have everything ending on a downbeat. And in fact, this is one of the principal kind of rules of jazz style. If I'm playing Mary Had a Little Lamb and I want to put it in a jazz style, instead of playing, I'd anticipate that last eighth note. And that's exactly where the dit goes. So it's kind of showing you that this is actually replacing the strong beat, but we're intentionally anticipating that note. So again, so that's why we put in that percussive accent at these places, because usually it's indicating that we've shifted everything up by an eighth note. So again, do-dit, do-dit, do-va-do-dit. And here's how I would write it. I would probably have a staccato and an accent to show the dit. Sometimes in horn charts, if you read them, they have a little pyramid shape, a little caret for these dits. And that's kind of a specific horn articulation, and it's this exact same thing. It's the equivalent of a percussive accent. Your third rhythm I want to talk about is quarter notes. And it's kind of strange, in a sense, to talk about quarter notes when you talk about swing rhythm, because swing is so much about eighth notes, right? Eighth notes are the things that change. Yet it's important to know how to articulate quarter notes correctly. You don't want to just play them. You have to play them with some sort of articulation, right? So we're generally going to play quarter notes non-legato. So they're going to be long, but not connected. And we sometimes talk about quarter notes as being fat, because the tendency of most students and musicians is to rush through quarter notes. And if you're playing quarter notes correctly in jazz, especially in a slower tempo, it's almost going to feel like you're slowing down. And this fat quarter note, this long but not connected quarter note, is going to be the same whether you're playing them on the beat, like in bar 1 here, or off the beat, like in bar 2. For quarter notes, our mnemonic devices, we're going to say dot. So dot is this long a vowel sound, but the T shows you that it's not connected, right? So dot, dot. Why do we play quarter notes this way instead of legato? I have a theory. May or may not be right. But my theory is that we get articulation at 2 points in each note, right? When we strike the note and when we release the note. And so by releasing the note, we're able to kind of articulate a little bit more. And we're going to feel the articulation more between each quarter note. If I play, it's lovely, but it's not really highly rhythmic, right? There's not a ton of articulation in there, but we feel the front end of the note a little bit more that way. So if I were going to play these, I would, if I were going to mark articulations for these, I would probably just mark them as tenuto, just long, but separate, non-legato, not quite connected. And I love this example of Lil Darlin'. It has a shout chorus that goes like this, and listen for the fat quarter notes. connected. Listen to what happens if I play them connected. It's lovely, but we lose that sense of rhythm. We can't really feel the beat anymore. So it's really important to play your quarter notes not connected. So putting it together, here's a little jazz phrase that I wrote that has kind of all these kinds of rhythms. So how would we write out syllables? So the first quarter note is a dot, right? Long but not connected. Then you have an offbeat eighth note. And even if there's not an onbeat eighth note before it, we're going to call it a va. Whenever we have that shorter offbeat eighth note, we'll call it a va. And then a string of eighth notes, do, va, do, dit, followed by arrests. So we're going to make that last one a do, dit, right? Then another offbeat eighth note, va. Then a quarter note, dot. And then we have two eighth notes followed by a rest, so there'll be a do, dit. And if we're going to write the articulation in, it would look something like this. And I'm going to demonstrate for you the difference that the articulation makes. So I'm going to play it first with a swing feel, but no articulation. So the eighth notes will be swung, but I'm not actually going to put any of the articulation in. Right? Technically, I'm swinging those eighth notes, but you can hear that it's very rhythmically tepid. It's the equivalent of somebody kind of talking in a monotone, right? But if I add the articulation in, then we get all these levels of dynamic. And what's great about this is that it's the equivalent of how we speak, right? Good jazz playing kind of feels like a conversation. And if I talk in all monotone, then it is not going to be a very interesting conversation, right? Same thing. In classical music, oftentimes evenness is very prized, right? You want to practice your scales exactly evenly. And of course, in jazz, we want to have the control to be able to do that if we choose. But in jazz, we really want this to feel conversational and bring up some words, some notes more than the other. So listen again. So that's how I would play that. And if you still don't believe me that articulation is what makes swing feel, let's listen. I'm going to play an excerpt from an Oscar Peterson transcription. And I'm going to play it first with, well, let me preface it by saying this is from C-Jam Blues from Night Train by Oscar Peterson. And this tempo is so fast that the eighth notes aren't really swung. Rhythmically, they're exactly straight. It'll sound like this. Okay, so it's not. It would be a little nuts to try to play it like that. And Oscar Peterson doesn't. So I'm going to play a short passage for you once without adding any accents. And then I'm going to add the accents. And you're going to hear that now it starts to swing. So first without accents. But if I start adding in some accents and loosen up my hand and my arm and my wrist a little bit. All of a sudden it comes to life. All of a sudden it actually feels like somebody's talking to you. And that's the whole idea, is that you want it to feel very conversational. So those are your three articulations that you want to master if you're going to be playing in a swing style. The first is your eighth notes, your strings of eighth notes, do, va, do, va, do, va, do, va, legato, and with a little emphasis on the offbeat eighth notes. Or it could even be more than a little as you practice. Secondly is your do dits. These are your eighth notes followed by a rest. And usually it's because they're followed by a rest because you're anticipating the end of the phrase. And in these you want to give a percussive accent to that last eighth note. And then thirdly, for your quarter notes, you want to play them long, fat on the beat, but don't connect them. Don't make them legato because you want to hear the impact, the front end of each note. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel and consider buying my book. It's called Playing Solo Jazz Piano. It's maybe the best book ever written. And I always appreciate it when folks buy it from my site, which is jeremysiskind.com/shop. Because when you buy it from Amazon, they keep about half the profit. So I always appreciate my YouTubers who come over to my site. So thanks so much. Stay tuned. There'll be more videos to come. Have a great one.